I think that the West has miscalculated on, which could cost really bad for Ukraine, is that this recent uptick in the physical attack on the shadow fleet. We tried economic sanctions, and they wanted to have all these economic tools to try and prevent this so-called shadow fleet from doing business with oil, et cetera. Well, when that didn't work, then allegedly Ukraine, but I'm pretty sure it was using the intelligence from the West, decided to start physically attacking civilian tankers in international waters or in Turkish waters, as the last one that happened to do that. But now then Russia is saying, you know what, there's a response to that. And Putin said, and one of the other things that he claimed was, it could cost you Odessa. Well, okay, sorry. This is not the soundbite that I was looking for. This is what he was talking about. He said Vladimir Putin. This is in today's news, just hours ago. Pointed out that as a response to all of these attacks on their civilian fleet and tankers, Russia may well attack ships that call at Ukraine ports. And the head of state also said, but there is another answer for this: to cut off Ukraine from access to the sea, and then they will simply have nowhere to carry out their pirate attacks. And many have been saying in previous days to this, specifically, that it's time to take Odessa. What do you make of this risk?
Well, this is a good example of where your brilliant plan backfires very, very badly. Odessa, which was established in the late 1700s under Catherine the Great, was never part of this place we call Ukraine. Okay, we need to understand that. It was always a Russian city established by the Russian army at the behest of Catherine the Great. This was the plan to seize control of what is now referred to as New Russia, Novorossiya. These were the areas that had been dominated by the Ottomans, and before the Ottomans, the Golden Horde, the Tartar Khanate, and so forth. There was nothing there, basically open land, because neither the Mongols nor the Ottomans had succeeded them in control did much to develop or cultivate anything there. So the Russians moved in and took it. Now, history lesson aside, Kharkov up in the north and Odessa down in the south were always Russian cities. They were not historically Ukrainian. And again, you've got to go back through the maps. Nobody in the United States pays attention to what the maps of the United States looked like 100 years ago. But I guarantee you that the Europeans do pay attention to maps. And if you look at the last 500-600 years, you'll find out where Ukraine really existed. And it never existed down in the south near Odessa, or that far east where Kharkov is. Now, having said that, Vladimir Putin has made virtue of necessity. You're going to attack, the defenseless tankers and freighters that are in the Black Sea. Fine. We'll take Odessa. Now, can they take Odessa? Of course. They can take that very, very quickly. There isn't much down there. In fact, they just lost some strikes in the last few days that actually killed some French officers and maybe some enlisted men that had landed there with military aircraft. They didn't intend to, but they happened to be in the same location with a large number of Ukrainian pilots. And so, bang, they ended up losing their lives. Odessa has been on the menu for a long time. This is a brilliant opportunity to take advantage of the situation and take Odessa. Making sure that Ukraine is landlocked is actually a key security objective for Russia, because most of the weapons that come into the country from the south come through that port. The other source of weapons comes in from Poland. You can probably shut down Poland more easily because you have rail links and transportation links on roads and trucks, easy to spot, easy to target, easy to eliminate. But controlling a port is a more difficult proposition. The easy way to do it is to take it from the land. I mentioned Zaporozhye earlier. There's nothing to stop the Russians from crossing the bridge at Zaporozhye, moving south and seizing control of Odessa from the land. There is not much down there to defend Odessa. And by the way, Macron has wanted to send vast numbers of French troops. That means 20 or 30,000, which is all that they could send. But he's wanted to send them down there, and the parliament in France has said, "You've lost your mind, Mr. President." No. So what he has sent down there is some French Foreign Legionnaires and a few Air Force assets. So there's nothing to stop the Russians from seizing control of Odessa. And frankly, from their standpoint, if I were sitting there and I were asked as a member of the general staff, I'd say we should have done it a year ago.
Well, I guess we'll see what ends up happening with that, and that could, that could literally be the coup de grace that of the whole thing that could just seal the doom of whatever is going to be left of Ukraine once it's over. Listen, though, before we let you go, though, there's one last topic that I want to get your view on, because unfortunately, while we're trying to get this war ramped down, the Trump administration seems to be taking action that's setting himself up, if you can say it that way, for starting a new war, even though he campaigned against doing that in Venezuela. And there was this claim a couple of days ago that Trump admitted, actually, not didn't claim, he said that he talked to Maduro and told him that basically you have, according to reports, a week to leave. Well, there was a lot of rumors that have been floating around the last couple of days that Maduro was leaving, that he was at an airfield near the border, et cetera. Those all turned out to be true. And this morning, he was defiantly dancing out in the open before huge crowds of supporters in Caracas. And basically, well, not basically, you see the quote there. He said, "We do not want peace of slaves, nor do we want peace of colonies," Maduro is claimed to have said. Where is this going? What do you think is going to happen here?
Well, I think, as we mentioned earlier, if you're the leader of a great power like the United States, and you make threats, and then you assemble forces, you are occasionally expected by the rest of the world to carry through on your threats and use those forces. I am afraid that's where we are. I suspected from the very beginning, luminaries like Elliot Abrams, who was in previous administrations a strong neocon Zionist and a big advocate for intervention in Venezuela, the destruction of Iran, the destruction of Russia, everything else. I think he and others have tried to persuade the president that this is a cakewalk. And you'll probably never have to use the military power that you've got anyway. They'll fold. They'll go away. Now, I've sat with some people that have lived for as long as 9 years down in Venezuela, people with military and intelligence backgrounds, and they all told me the same thing. They said, sure, there are people that don't like Maduro. There's no question about it. But they don't like the idea of the United States shoving some puppet down their throats. And they are proud of their country and its past, its history, and they will fight to defend it. I think that's where we are. It's very clear that they will fight to defend it. The question that President Trump needs to ask, I doubt he's watching us, but if he is, he should go back to the methodology of purpose, method, end state. He should ask the military and the State Department leaders that are behind this, what is the political military objective for our military power? Or what are we really trying to achieve with military power? And is that objective that you're going to, explain in detail actually attainable? You can always come up with political military objectives that are fantasy worlds. Oh, we want to do this. Well, we all want $10 million. But you're not going to whip it up with a magic wand. So what are you trying to achieve? Is that attainable? That's number one. Second, what's your methodology for attaining this? How does the military power that you've assembled result in the outcome that you've just described? And then finally, when this is over, what's the end state? What do we want things to look like, not just in Venezuela, but in the Southern Caribbean basin? What do we want to happen in neighboring countries? Because they will be affected by whatever we do. So what is the regional end state as a consequence of what you're doing? Nobody asks those questions in Washington. Nobody asked them on the way into Vietnam. The man who asked those hard questions in 1951, 52 was Dwight Eisenhower. And he asked them about Korea. And the answers he received were absurd. Well, we need 850,000 men to invade Manchuria, take Beijing, and end this war. What? And Eisenhower said, I'm not going to tell the American people they need to support that. Nobody in the United States wants to send people to die in Manchuria to remove the Communist Party from power in Beijing. What, have you lost your minds? So he shut it down and he drove an end to this thing. That's what Trump needs to do. He needs to step back and say, gentlemen, you have lied to me and you've made a fool of me. No more. You're fired. He needs to get a new team.
He certainly should do that. I fear, like you, that he may have overextended, because now that he's put his credibility on the line. Because now then, what do you do next? If you've sent all this force down there and you have Maduro literally dancing in the street in defiance, I mean, it's hard for me to imagine how any scenario. There's some of the. Yeah, they have a little dance off. Maybe that's what they should do. They should be doing a dance off instead of a military operation. That I'm not sure who would lose that.
Well, I think Donald Trump has better moves, frankly.
Well, there you go. He certainly has more audience participation there, and I guess that's the score. But in all seriousness,
you know what the best answer is always the truth. I know that sounds awful. And
almost anachronistic, but man, do we love it here.
Yeah, but it really is. And Winston Churchill once said, "I've had to eat my words on more than one occasion, and I always found them a full and sufficient meal." And I think that President Trump needs to say, "I've re-examined all of this, and I don't see how our military power is going to result in the kind of change that we would like to see. And so I'm withdrawing our forces, and we will turn to other ways to achieve our ends in the future, one of which will be to talk directly with this government and see what we can achieve. And in the meantime, stay tuned, because in the next week, I will have announcements about new members of my team. There will be some changes in my cabinet and my advisory staff. But to do that, he'd have to be Eisenhower. He isn't.
Well, that's a very safe bet to say there. I wonder if you could just, whether it's your sources or just your experience having to do with the administration, why do you suppose that Trump didn't take the easy wins? Because at least according to reports, there's been two separate occasions. One where Maduro said basically you can have access to all of our oil and minerals, and as long as I stay in power. And then apparently on this phone call that happened a couple of days ago, he said, well, I'll just keep the military. You can even put your favorite person in the head of the government, this opposition figure that we're supporting. And apparently Trump said no to that too. Why would he say no to ones that would be huge political wins? It's like someone must be telling him, no, use the military tool here. What do you think?
Well, yeah, there's no question about it. We can speculate on who these people are. No doubt Marco Rubio, who's been crusading for intervention in Venezuela, not just there, other places in Central America, and ultimately in Cuba for many, many years. So I'm sure that he's had a major role to play. And remember who his intellectual mentor is. That's Bill Kristol, who's a leading neoconservative and Zionist. So I don't think it's hard to figure out where the theology originates or the ideology originates. That's clear. But President Trump, should have at least followed the advice of somebody like Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton only made one really dramatic mistake militarily during his tenure, and that was in the Balkans. Remember, he was castigated because he didn't want to go into Bosnia for good reason. He didn't want another military commitment there. Neither did his Secretary of Defense at the time, Bill Perry. They all realized we have no strategic long-term interests in the Balkans. Gosh, imagine that. We want to see peace, but that's a matter for the Europeans. We'll back them, but we're not going to become involved. Subsequently, he buckled in Kosovo in a dramatic way and was dragged into that fight. He really didn't want that fight, and it went badly quickly. It was promised initially by General Wes Clark, and I think Madeleine Albright and Berger, the national security advisor, that this would end in 3 or 4 days, or at most a week or 10 days, something like that. Well, that was a dumb thing to say, because there's no evidence to support that. You were dealing with the Serbs. The Serbs are very tough people. 600,000 of them died fighting the Germans under occupation. Think about that. This is not something that you're going to witness in Serbia. The Serbs are not going to all fall apart and bend down and beg forgiveness. So this thing ultimately ends on day 78 because you send Strobe Talbot to Moscow to negotiate a deal and promise the Russians billions of dollars. I don't know the details, but that's what ended the thing. And we bombed the living daylights out of everything that didn't move. because that's all we knew how to do at that point. And it was very clear that President Clinton said there will be no troops on the ground. I'm not going to become involved in a land war. And that was his only real mistake strategically, because there was nothing at stake for us in that environment at all. And he ended it simply by telling everyone, you can bomb as much as you want. I'm sending Talbot to Moscow and there will be no ground troops. Well, that's a pretty clear exit strategy. Was it perfect? No, it was imperfect, but he escaped the trap. President Trump hasn't figured that out yet, and he's been trapped in Venezuela, trapped in Ukraine, trapped in the Middle East.